It gives me great pleasure to bring in Carol L, who's sharing today on Pathways to Spirituality. Thank you. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Charlotte, for inviting me and everybody for being here. Hi, everyone. I'm an alcoholic and my name is Carol, and I'm really grateful and honored to be here today. And thanks to my friends who come to support me too. I was given a gift of sobriety, and it was on May 1st, 1988 in Fort Worth, Texas at the Glasshouse Group. And I'm grateful to be here. And congratulations. Somebody had, I think it was Nick with 33 days, and Kate with 63 days, I think it was. Congratulations. You are on an amazing journey. And we never, ever have to drink again, but we have to do certain things to not drink again. And I haven't had a drink a day at a time in 12,697 days. So it's about 34 years and 9 months and 3 days without a drink. And I used to say, I'm not an alcoholic. I can go 2 weeks without a drink. It was a hard 2 weeks. I would do that over and over and over again. And I have 1,813 weeks now. And the way you get time, they told me there was a secret when I got sober, and I heard people with a lot of time, and they kept telling me there's a secret, and I'd ask them what it was, and they'd say, keep coming back, you'll find out. And finally, somebody told me, they said, you don't drink and you don't die a day at a time, and the days add up. And they do. And I haven't ever had to go back out and drink again, because I have never heard anybody come back and say it's better out there. I've heard y'all come back and say it's worse, and some people die. I've lost people I love, including a few months ago, because they go, yeah, I know what to do, but they're not doing it, and they drink and they die. And we have this book, it's called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they told me it's a textbook, it's not a novel. They told me everything I need to know is in the book, and to do what it says. And to read the book and see if I can identify. And I found that for me, I read my big book out loud in the singular. The reason I've done that, because when I read silently, my mind wanders and I don't remember what I read. I can just read anything and not know what I read a minute after I read it. But when I read it out loud, what happens is it slows my mind down, and I read it in the singular and not the we all the time. It's like it says, I have to smash that illusion that I can ever drink again. And I turn things into questions like, do I believe alcohol's that subtle foe? Yeah, it is. It sneaks up in strange ways. Like, Carol, you don't need to go to a meeting. Carol, don't take that phone call. Carol, you don't have to read your book. Carol, you don't have to ask God to keep you sober today. All these little ways. And I tell stinking thinking to get out of here. I choose to not let you sabotage my recovery. Now, when I came to you, if you told me one day I'm going to be talking about God and spirituality, I would have just laughed at you. Because I grew up with being told a lot, God's going to punish me if, whatever those ifs were. I didn't listen to my parents, if I didn't do this, if whatever. And then I did things. And then when I drank, I did more stuff. And when I drank, I sacrificed morals, values, and principles. And I did stuff I wouldn't have done if I weren't drinking. And I made deals with God. I promise I won't do it again if this doesn't happen. And then I would keep doing those things. More stuff had happened. So I always thought God is punishing me. But what I found out is God loves me so much that my higher power that I've found through Alcoholics Anonymous and prayer and actions loves me so much that said, Carol, think one day you're going to get to Alcoholics Anonymous, and you are going to need a lot of the stories and experiences to share with other people to help them stay sober like they're going to do with you. Because when somebody planted that seed of Alcoholics Anonymous in me, I kept saying, I don't need that. And it took 16 and a half years, because when I had about 3 months sober, I tracked that man down. And he had 16 and a half years. And what he had done is a company I worked for in New Jersey when I lived there A lot of people had alcohol problems because they wouldn't go out to lunch if we couldn't drink at lunchtime. And they bought me my first drink, those people. I was 18 years old on my 18th birthday, which is legal in New York. They bought me a martini and it tasted terrible. How could you drink this stuff? So they got me a blackberry sour. Now I drank for the effect, but sometimes I had to learn how to drink whiskey I didn't like to drink because I liked the effect of it. So that's what I had to do. Now I'm going to read something out of our big book because that's a habit. I got into new habits sober. So a habit I got into is to read something out of the big book when I share. And this is called Building a New Life, and it's on page 485 and 484 in our big book. It says, I've thought about doing crazy things since I've been sober, but never taken a drink. To me, sobriety is a gift from God to me. And if I drank, it would be given the gift back. If you return a gift, the person takes it back, right? God takes it back, I'm dead. And it says on 485, there have been some hard times too during years of sobriety. But what I've learned is it doesn't matter what hardships and losses I've endured in sobriety, I have not had to go back to drinking. As long as I work the program, keep being of service, go to meetings, keep my spiritual life together, I can live a decent life. The belonging I always wanted, I have found in AA and in sobriety. I don't think about drinking. God is there. My sponsor's there. All the credit belongs to God. On my own, I could not have quit. I know. I tried it. That's true for me. I've had a very decent life sober, and yes, it's been hard. And even for Bill and Bob, our co-founders, it says life was not easy for the two men. It says that in our big book. So I thought when you got sober, life happened, right? Get 20 or 30 years sober, never have problems again. No, the people that taught me that had sobriety longer than I did when I was new, they said life happens. They lose jobs, they get divorces, they have health issues, they retire and get to have fun. And it all brought them back where it brought them closer to the program and closer to God. Now, when I came to you, I would not have picked up a card that said the word God on it. My friends not in the program told me that AA's brainwashing me, and I had a sponsor and I told her and she said, Carol, it's okay, your brain needs washing. Her name was Lois, and when I was at a meeting when I was new and they said somebody needs a meeting to her house, I was almost 5 weeks sober, and I got her number and I met Lois, and she was confined to bed with a third of a lung on oxygen the last 7 years of her life. She was 22 years sober. She got sober in June 1966. And she taught me about God and prayer and spirituality. Now, I will tell you, with 2 weeks without that drink, because I told you I can go 2 weeks without a drink. It's a hard 2 weeks, but I could do it if I white knuckle it. Now I don't think about drinking or not drinking. Right. But what happened at 2 weeks without that drink, so I wanted to drink really bad because that emotional pain hit. I drank out of bars and I did fun stuff, and it was fun for a while. Went through a really bad abusive divorce in my mid-20s, and my drinking got a lot worse. In my early 30s, I wasn't drinking out at bars anymore. I was drinking at home, and I isolated if I wasn't at work, and I didn't go to jail, and I didn't get a DUI, didn't lose a job. The boyfriend I had, he drank like I did. Family was across the country, so I didn't get grief for my drinking, but I felt bad about myself because of my drinking and what happened to what I did. And at 2 weeks without that drinking, I was at a meeting and I started crying because that emotional pain hit really strong. And I left that meeting. I was going to walk out the front door and go drink. Now I'm telling you this because looking back, this is the first time I saw God, that I call God, working in my life. So when I was sober without a drink. Now somebody greeted me at the front door and gave me a hug and gave me chores to do, like set up chairs and make coffee. So there must have been a God that had somebody greeting me at the door, welcoming me too. But this God had somebody in the kitchen that I had to walk by to go out the front door, and he stopped me. And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go drink because this hurts a lot to not drink and feel this stuff." And he told me not to go back out. He said, "If I go back out, I might not make it back. And if I make it back, it might be a long time before I make it back. And whatever I went out over would probably be there and maybe worse. Maybe I would drive drunk and kill somebody because I drove in blackouts. I drove drunk. Thankfully, nothing happened at any of those. Yeah, stuff happened when I went home with people I shouldn't have, but that's another story too." So he told me to go back in that meeting. And I went back and I sat after the meeting with the ladies, and we talked and we cried and we shared stories, and we kind of did a fourth and fifth step about that emotional pain that was causing me to want to go drink. And there's those promises in the big book. There's lots of them. When they say the promises and they read the ninth step, that's just a few. It's just a small glimmer of promises in the big book. It says in the big book, "I am in the world to play the role that God assigns. And just to the extent that I humbly do that, will God allow me to match calamity and serenity." Now that's a promise to me. It also says my real purpose in life is to fit myself to be a maximum service to God and the people about me. One of the other promises, it's in the ninth step. It says, "I won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it." In my big book, it says, "Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the deepest, darkest secrets of my past are my greatest possessions. They avert death and misery for others." That's a really big promise. That's all those things that happened to me in those 16 and a half years before I got to you. And I haven't had to drink through them. Now, I've had a lot of stuff happen sober. Had a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of great joys. I've gotten to recently, I met somebody from a sponsor that's from Mexico that was up in Florida the other day. I got to meet her. I get to travel in my camper van and go around the country and go to meetings and meet people and have a lot of fun, go to international conventions. Also had harder stuff. 3 of my sponsors have died with long-term sobriety. Some of my friends have gone out, some of them have died. And my parents have both passed, and my husband, and I've had cancer several times and a lot of surgery sober. And I get to keep seeing God working through everything. And that's what I watch for. Like when my parents were dying, they said, "How did I get through that?" Because I share with you that I watched my parents both die slowly and my husband die slowly. And then one day I realized, I haven't told you how I do that. I like solution. That's what I try to share. So how do I do that? I keep watching for God, no matter what's happening. Now, the reason I'm going to tell you that I believe in this higher power is because of Lois, my first sponsor I just told you about. I think God gave me the greatest gift when God gave me Lois, because what she taught me in my early sobriety is what I still do now. And it's what I share with you and people I sponsor and people I share with, because it's worked for me for 34 years and 9 months and a couple of days. She gave me a solid foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous. My roots are deep in Alcoholics Anonymous. I live in South Florida and we get hurricanes. We've had some Cat 5s I've lived through. Now we have different kinds of trees here. We have these trees called ficus trees, which are 4 stories plus tall. And what happens when the ground gets really wet and saturated, those trees fall over and their root balls are 10, 12, 15 feet high. The leaves don't, the branches don't break, the trees fall over. Now we have other trees like the Norfolk pine and the Cat 5, they snapped off, branches flew, watched them go both directions through the eyes of the storm when they passed. But you know what? My foundation's solid because I have not drank again. And I haven't thought about it. And some of you call me with stuff happening in your life and you tell me what's going on. And some of it's painful and some of it's funny. And I go, "But did you think to drink through it?" And you say no. Now that's the miracle. that we don't think about drinking or not drinking once we're sober and we're working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, Lois was very big in prayer, and at Glass House, they called it the God Squad, because we should live our life as if we live in a glass house, and it was a church annex. Now, it took me a while when I decided to come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't even know what Alcoholics Anonymous was, except if you go and you don't drink. For some reason, they're in Texas, they were at churches, and I'm Jewish, so I thought you were religious. So I kind of stayed away for that. I also thought it was a big room with a bunch of telephones on tables, and you call, say, I want a drink. Somebody goes, don't drink, and hangs up on you. Now, I don't know where I heard that, but I know it's not the truth. But when I would talk to Lois, she would laugh. Sometimes we'd say, I laugh at meeting. We went to a meeting I went to, we laughed a lot. And at first I said, it's not funny. And they said, come back, keep coming back, you'll laugh. And then I'd be laughing. And then somebody newer than me would come in and we'd laugh. And he'd go, it's not funny. And we go, keep come back, you'll laugh. And we do. That's what it's about. Now, when I had to find this higher power and I wasn't sure I was an alcoholic yet, Lois said, Carol, if you weren't drinking, would you have done the things you did and put yourself in those situations? And I said, no. She said, if you need a drink to be social, you're not a social drinker. That made a lot of sense to me. And she said, normal people don't wonder if they're alcoholics or not. And I went to my neighbor one day when I had about 90 days sober, and I go, but when you have a really bad day, don't you just want to go home and have a drink? And she said, no. Go, really? See, she thinks different than me. And I don't know how to sip anything, no matter what it is. And sometimes I didn't like the taste of liquor. I did it for the effect. I drank what the boyfriend at the time drank. When I got a boyfriend, and one of them, he drank J&B Scotch. Another one drank Canadian Club. See, I like the sweet stuff where I don't taste it sometimes. Now, I never took a whole loaf of bread, put one little piece of ham on the sandwich because I don't like ham either, and changed the proportions till I could eat the sandwich, right? But I did it with alcohol till I could drink it straight, change the proportion, water and ice to whiskey. But Lois had this poem, and it's called I Am There, that the Apollo 15 astronauts put on the moon, and she kept it in her big book, and she read it to me, and she had me read it, and it's not conference approved. But the reason I'm telling you is maybe it will help you like it helped me, because it is not a religious poem. I told it, it's on my refrigerator every day. I look at it. This is it. I'll just read one or two. It says, do you need me? I am there. You cannot see me, yet I'm the light you see by. You cannot feel me. I'm the power at work in your hands. And only in absolute stillness beyond self can you know me as I am, but as a feeling and a faith. Yet I am there, yet I hear, yet I answer. When you need me, I am there. Even if you deny me, I am there. And it goes on. And it helped me start to believe in a higher power. And my big book says God's everything or nothing. What do I want God to be? Now I choose to have God be everything. I don't want God to be nothing. Yesterday, I live in South Florida. It was sunny yesterday and warm. Today it rained. It's very windy. I was going to do laundry. It's very windy outside. It might be sunny later. I don't know. My God sometimes doesn't know what God wants to do with the weather. Sometimes it's sunny and then it rains and then the sun comes out again. And sometimes part of the sky is blue with white clouds and the other part's gray. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that can do that stuff. So my higher power's big. The picture behind me I took in a helicopter a few years ago. And see, if you look, people aren't even specks. Houses are just barely specks. And in the distance, those buildings are kind of foggy and in a haze. But see, I don't know what's coming. God knows. I invite myself into God's day because anything is possible in God's day. I don't invite God into my small, limited day where I'm in a little apartment right now with a lot of stuff. But God is everywhere. I read something once and Lois said I could pray and ask God to let me know God how God wants me to know God. I can even say the word God without gagging like I didn't do when I was new. I couldn't get that word out. Use higher power, use great mystery. My Native American friends call it creator. My God is gender neutral. I get to use whatever attributes of that higher power I need to draw on whenever I need it. It could be courage, it could be strength, it could be wisdom, it could be serenity, like we have in the prayer, serenity prayer. Could be strength, because sometimes I have to face hard stuff. It could be comfort, because sometimes I need God to comfort me. And I can use any attribute I want. And my God, like I said, is gender neutral. Where God guides, God provides. And I ask God for strength, and God gives me difficulties to overcome that make me stronger. And I get to the point where I just say, okay, God, however this goes. I have a lesson and an experience to grow through to share with somebody else someday. When I was new, they told me to put a note on my mirror. Mine is currently on my refrigerator, and now it's a picture that one of my friends who's in this meeting sent me from the UK of a sunrise over her house. Says the same message, but she typed it up and sent me this beautiful picture. And the note says, "Dear Carol, I know what I'm doing. Love, God." And I have a poem on my wall, and it says, "God has a plan for my life, and I don't need to know what it is." And it goes on. And if you want the poem, my number's on the screen, and you can send me a message, and I will gladly share it with you. Now, my big book says God's everything or nothing. Now, I listen to you, and I've asked people when I was new, and I still listen to you share about your higher power, and I listen to your stories, and I see how big God is. My higher power doesn't say, "Gee, Carol, you had your quota this week. You have to wait a while. I've already done a lot for you this week. Let's wait because there's other people that need me." No, my higher power can work in all of our lives at the same time. God is not my father, and God is not my friend. Lois taught me don't put people on pedestal, including her. She died at a year sober. She had almost 23 years sober. I don't put people on pedestals, but they told me everybody teaches me something. Some teach me what to do and what not to do, and how to be and how not to be. And the how not to be and what not to do sometimes are louder. And it's easy to have a good program when things go the way I want, but what is it when I don't have them go my way? That God says, "Carol, I'm going to give you a pop quiz, Carol. Let's see what you know and how are you applying it here." God's not my father. My parents were pretty strict. They broke their word. They didn't keep promises. They lied to me. So I don't want a higher power that's an image of a father or mother. That doesn't work. So mine is a mystery. I don't understand how God works, and I don't want to. I don't try to outsmart God. When opportunity knocks, I see what's there before I slam the door in God's face and say no. Now, every now and then I'll play tug of war with God. And sometimes God lets me fall on a soft pillow, and sometimes I fall flat in the mud on my face. I never know. What I've learned even this week, I keep growing, right? It says we grow in effectiveness and understanding. It says I have a daily reprieve contingent on maintaining my spiritual growth. I don't maintain it. That's walking on a treadmill. I have to keep growing. I get the lessons to walk through to keep seeing how big God is. Now, just this week, God showed me how big God is again. See, I know A, B, and C. God knows this other part of the alphabet and some in other characters that I don't even know what they are, right? Because I was looking, should I move or shouldn't I move? Stuff happening without going into all the details. So I took action, and I asked God, bless it or block it, and let me know the truth. God, if it be your will, please put me in the place I can best use my talents and God-given abilities according to your purpose for my life. So I do the footwork, and God has the outcome. Now, my part was look for places to move to. Bless it or block it, right? Found one, drove a few 600 miles round trip. Didn't work out. I told my attorney, asked him a question. He said, "Gee, my ex-secretary lives in another state. She wants to move to Florida. Maybe we could find something that both of you can live in, because he has a trust he manages that has to buy a house. So we've been looking at that. Now, what do you think? See, that wasn't an outcome I expected. I just have to keep putting it out there and learning to tell you. See, I don't want to tell you stuff. I always thought I have to be big, strong, tough, and rely on me because I didn't have people I could rely on. What Lois taught me, among other things, is, Carol, what does it feel like to do for other people? I said, it feels good. I like that. She said, if you don't let other people help you, you are depriving them of that feeling. Because maybe like when I pray, God, how can I be of service today? Maybe you're praying it. And when I ask you for help or give you something and say, do you have any ideas on how to handle this? Maybe God's answering your prayer too. I don't know. But I suit up and I show up. And they told me a loving God expresses itself through me, and my words, actions, and deeds need to reflect that. So I've learned to rely on a higher power. Like I said, I invite myself into God's day. A lot of things happen that I don't even know are happening at the moment. My God sees the future. Maybe I'm talking to one of you because this has happened too. And you share something with me, or you give me your number, and guess what? A while later, I meet somebody else and they're in that area and I can connect you. Or they have some issue happening in their life that I know somebody they can share with because I haven't had that experience. I've got a lot of those. And I love our online meetings. I treat them like my in-person meetings. I get there early and we say hello and greet each other. And my number is on the screen. I know it's a recording, but I'm not going to share it. But you know what? I get there early. If the chat's open, I welcome you. We're in a meeting, I go, we're nice to be in another meeting with you. It's nice to see you again. If you're new, I try to get your number and ask you call you. I was taught, don't wait for somebody to call them, because it was really hard for me when I was new to make phone calls. And I don't put in the chat, I have to leave early and I'm sorry I'm late, because at an in-person meeting, I wouldn't disrupt the meeting to do that. And I call them in online meetings. They're not a Zoom meeting, because I was taught to include the traditions in my life, that I need the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. See, tradition one is unity. I'm only one person. I'm not different people for different people anymore. And I have an ultimate authority of a loving higher power. That's the only one I need to be true to. And I don't have opinion on outside issues because it keeps my life more simple. And Lois taught me other people can be wrong and I don't have to be right. And tradition 6 is I don't endorse outside entities. So when I went to the glass house at a church annex, I wasn't at a church meeting. That was just the building my AA meeting was held. So this is one of many platforms my AA meeting is held at. So I'm at an online AA meeting. And I have a higher power that has a sense of humor that keeps giving me things to grow through. Now, when I was 30 days, because somebody had 33 days sober, at 30 days sober, yeah, somebody asked me to read How It Works, and I wouldn't read it because I was so self-conscious. I thought if I stumble over the words, you would laugh at me, and then I'd be embarrassed and probably never come back again. But what happened at meeting is I was sitting in that meeting, and instead of hearing what anybody said, and instead of being proud, I had 30 days without a drink, which was forever. I thought that responsibility statement, that was the first thing I saw when I walked into the glass house. It says, I'm responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. For that, I'm responsible. Because what I learned that day is the guilt was worse than the fear. If everybody sitting in that meeting had said no, there would not have been a meeting for me to be sitting in. So I made a decision that day at 30 days sober to never say no to an AA request. And to the best of my ability, I've kept that. Now, maybe I can't do it at the exact same time, but I will do it as soon as possible. And you know what? After that meeting, somebody came up to me and congratulated me on 30 days. And I go, but I didn't read how it works. And he goes, but when's the last time you had 30 days without a drink since you started drinking? And I never had. So they told me to be proud of my 30 days and to never apologize for any length of sobriety. There's a lady I met, and I was about 6 weeks sober, and she was talking to somebody. It happened to be Clancy. She was called Clancy. I was almost 6 weeks sober, and he spoke at my home group. And she went over to him. He was 29 years sober. And she said, I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm only almost 24 years sober. I went over to her and I said, excuse me, ma'am, do you know what you said? And she said, what? I said, you said you're only almost 24 years sober. I'm only almost 6 weeks sober. She said, honey, once I was only almost 6 weeks sober. She goes, if I drank today, I wouldn't have almost 24 years. She said, sobriety's like marbles. You can't stack it. Don't ever apologize for any length of sobriety. I don't take it for granted. Sometimes I work hard for it. Sometimes I don't even think about it. Now, I love a lot of stories they told us when I was new. And the other night at a meeting, I got the opportunity to share them for 40 minutes and I loved it. And it's how I experienced my sobriety. And I want to keep them alive. So I'm going to share a few things with you. So one of the things they told me is, Carol, clasp your hands. So y'all can do this. I can see some of you. They said, Carol, clasp your hands and what thumb's in the front? And I said, my right one. They said, switch it so my left thumb's in the front. And they asked me how it felt. I said, it feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right. It feels awkward. They told me every day, Carol, clasp your hands, and every time your right thumb's in the front, switch it so your left thumb is. And one day when I clasp my hands, my left thumb will be in the front. It will be automatic and comfortable. And when I clasp my hands the other way, it's not going to be comfortable anymore. They said that's what new behavior in Alcoholics Anonymous is. At first, it's going to feel awkward and uncomfortable. But the more I do it, the more automatic it's going to get, and the more comfortable it's going to get. And then the old behaviors aren't going to be comfortable anymore. And that's been my experience. Now there's a little boy and he's walking on the beach and he's flying a kite. And a man comes over and he says, excuse me, little boy, what are you doing? He said, I'm flying my kite. Man says, but how do you know your kite's there? You can't see it. It's up in the clouds. And the little boy responded, but I can feel the tug on the string. See, I can't see God, but I can experience God and feel God, right? I can't see the wind, but right outside my window, the palm tree's blowing pretty hard. And I don't think I could huff and puff and make it do that, right? Now, how do I do the step? I got through the steps quick. We went through the book like it says, and it says the third step's vital and crucial. I had to find that third step, and I did it. Now, I can give you a really good example about a third step. I did my third step right away. I think I was maybe 3 or 4 days after I met Lois, and we kept getting together, and God had to give me a sponsor confined to bed to teach me to sit still, because I don't do that real well. Sitting through an hour meeting was hard. Well, I'm going to tell you the formula. Lois gave me instructions. I had to read my big book every day, cover to cover, whatever I could read, and I read it out loud in the singular, like I told you. It makes it more personal. I took my book around to meetings and I let you all sign and write in my big book. And if I went to conferences, you did, and at international conferences, conventions I went to, only people at that one signed a book specific for that convention. It's a good icebreaker. If you're shy like I was, take out your big book, pass it around at the meeting and ask people to sign it and put their date, whatever they want to write. They'll write on their favorite page. They might write a message. And when I read my book, I go, oh yeah, I remember that. That was at that con. I remember that person. I remember whatever, and it makes my book more real for me. Now, Lois told me, because I drank at home the end of my drinking, she didn't want me home drinking by myself. She kept me very busy. So in the morning, I'd ask God to keep me sober and say thank you at night. Told you I already had to write that note. We had telephones. I had notes taped all over my telephone. We didn't have cell phones and Google when I got sober. We had dictionaries to look up words. And she would call me intractable. I go, what does it mean? She said, look it up in the dictionary. I go, well, how do you spell it? She said, look it up in the dictionary. I go, but I don't know how to spell it. She goes, you'll find it. Contempt prior to investigation. If you don't know, read Appendix A in the back of your big book. It talks about contempt prior to investigation. It means stubborn, obstinate, and difficult to treat or cure. That's what intractable means. I'm not as intractable anymore. Thankfully, I'm not. So in the morning, at night, and sometime during the middle of the day, and I had to Xerox pages out of my big book because we didn't have all this technology stuff. She had me read the 3rd and 7th step prayer. And she had me read page 68 to 71 and ask God to help me set my ideals and live up to them. She said, Carol, if you know what your ideals are, you know what your principles are, you know how to live, and are they in accordance with your principles or not? If they're not, I probably don't need to be doing them. She told me if I quit doing the things that make me feel dirty, ashamed, guilty, and remorseful, I won't feel that way. And if I don't feel that way, I won't have to put alcohol in my body anymore. Because I was clean after I did that 4th and 5th step and after I was doing my amends. But that 5th step's a big one. And then she had me read 84 to 88, which is 10 and 11, because it gives me instructions on what to do and also in how it works when we read that. By reading out loud, those things and phrases stick in my mind because I would hear, I'm stood at a turning point. The result was nil until I let go absolutely. Pause when agitated or doubtful. Ask for an intuitive thought or decision. And I keep seeing new things in my big book. And we don't have to do this perfectly. One of the slogans, progress, not perfection. But it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Doesn't say perfectly. That was a new awareness I had a couple weeks ago to see how it works differently. Just the one word change. And I keep seeing different things in my big book all these years later. And I will tell you, I have a sponsor currently. She's 3 years older than me. She's 57 years sober. She has 23 years more time than I do. And she has a connection to a higher power. And see, God loves me a lot because I was praying for a new sponsor, and through intuitive thought to go to a certain meeting, I heard that speaker and I got her number and asked her to be my sponsor. And that's what happens when I pray. Now, Lois always would laugh at me, and then she'd tell me to stand up, take 2 steps, and say, thank you, God, you can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time. Now, in addition to the pages I told you, she had me read 3 times a day, go to a meeting before work, 2 meetings after work, write to GSO, say, I want to be of service. They wrote back, and they said, here's some women in prison you can write to. And then they sent me this thing. It's called Loners International. It was in my mailbox today. Got a new one today. This is the November-December 2023 issue. And it's people all over the world, and we write to each other and we stay sober by letter. And I've done that for 34 years and a few months. And I was on a meeting, I shared that the other day, and somebody was from Glasgow, Scotland. I said, I wrote to 2 people in Glasgow, and I told him who they were, and he knew one of them, right? And I was at a meeting I shared at in Ireland, in Cork, and somebody knew one of the people I met in Seattle that I wrote to, also in Ireland. The small world through Alcoholics Anonymous. We hold hands around the world. And so I keep asking God, show me how you're there. Let me know you how you want me to know you. And God keeps showing me. And Lois would always say, Carol, what are you grateful for? Stand up, take 2 steps, and thank you, God, you can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time. And I've used God in lots of ways. When I was new, and I share this story. Oh, I was going to tell you about the foundation. That got sidetracked. All right, God, let's do that. I never know what God's going to have me share, so you just have to go with whatever God puts in my mind comes out. So I got sidetracked. It's okay. God got us back here. When I don't know how sober I was, 12 years sober, maybe 11 years sober. God decided I needed to move from Fort Worth to another town. Somebody called, says, we have a job for you. I go, where are you? It was 3 hours south. I went and checked it out and didn't plan on changing, but I knew I needed to. See, where God guides, God provides, right? So I get to this new place. I call the realtor. I said, I'd like a duplex or, an apartment with a garage, maybe a fenced in yard. They said, you're not going to find that. It's a military town. Well, the morning I go down for looking at the apartments, he goes, guess what? This morning we had an opening for a duplex with 2 bedrooms, a garage, and a fenced in yard. And right, just worked out. Went, looked at other things, took that one. Went to look for where a meeting was. The house was 2 houses from the corner. And if I walked to the corner and made a right, there was a church about a block up, and that's where my meeting was. Now that city, I worked for the city. We wanted to build a new fire station. So they went out to bid for a fire station and the bids came in too high. So they rebid it 2 more times and they accepted the lowest bid on that project. And what happened is the company that they accepted the bid for poured the slab for the fire station. But because they cut costs, of course, they're going to change the material quantities and proportions. And when that slab started curing, it cracked and they couldn't build the fire station and they had to go into a lawsuit with the contractor. Now, I know my foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous is sturdy. I don't have cracks I haven't drank, and I haven't thought about drinking since I came to you. They told me when I came to the meetings, they said, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking for 24 hours and try our way of life? And I missed that at the online meetings. Nobody asked that anymore. They just says, anybody new? They don't ask, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking? And then they gave me this coin. And they said, if I want to drink, put it under my tongue. And if it melts, I can have one. And if it doesn't, I can't. That was straightforward. Now, I will tell you, I put that under my tongue a lot and it never melted. And for weeks and maybe even months, I wore something with pockets so I could keep that chip in my pocket and feel it every time. It was kind of like a security blanket. Now, when I was several weeks sober, it was after I met Lois. I might have been 2 months sober, maybe 3. I don't remember. It was early. I had this glass of water on my desk at work and it spilled into my calculator. And then water and electronics don't mix real well if you know anything about it. And so I called this calculator company and they gave me a bill for $45. This is in 1988. Now I called my sponsor and I told her, and she goes, what are you gonna do? I said, I think I'll call the calculator company, ask them to change the invoice to mechanical failure, not water damage, because I had a boss that would yell and scream at people. He wasn't always nice. Thought he'd fire me. She said, Carol, is that honest? Remember those ideals that I had to set? One of them was being honest. She said, Carol, is it honest? And I said, well, no, but he won't yell, scream, and fire me. And then she said, Carol, is it worth drinking over to not be honest? No. All right, now we're going to test God, right? All right, God, I had to drive down the street. God, we are driving down the street to my boss's office, and you are going to sit on the seat of the car, put your hands on the steering wheel. I am sitting on your lap and putting my hands on yours. And when we get to my boss's office, God, you're going to sit on the chair in front of his desk. I'm going to sit on your lap and you're going to put your arms around me and keep me safe. And I went down the street to my boss's office and I gave him the invoice and I told him I'll be glad to pay for it. This is what happened. Now, the shock to me was he didn't yell and scream and fire me. He just told me to be more careful. He'll pay the invoice, just be more careful. Now, when I went back to my office and we didn't have cell phones, I waited till I got home that night and I called Lois and she said, how do you feel? And I said, it feels good. She said, do you know what that is? I said, no. She said, that was self-respect and self-esteem and dignity. Now, a week or two later, my boss calls me down to his office again. I go, oh, God, all right. And I did the same thing. All right, God, we're going down to so-and-so's office. He gave me a raise because he admired my honesty. Now, see, I do the footwork, God has the results, and I don't have expectations, right? I don't put expectations on stuff. Now, I keep having God stories and God experiences. I have a 19-foot camper van I bought in 2005 with 25,000 miles. And when I was gone this past weekend, now she has over 110,000 miles. We've had a lot of experiences. You can go to carolsadventures.com and see lots of stories, read inspirational poems I put there, read stories about Lois and my travels. And it's been a lot of fun. And people say, aren't you scared to go by yourself? And I said, I don't go by myself. God goes, I go with God, and we get more God stories. Every time I travel, I get God stories. I was gone from the beginning of September to the middle of November, and I did about almost 3,000 miles, and I met some of you and somebody I sponsor, and a friend of mine I met online that has a story in the big book, and I got to go to a picnic in Tennessee for their district, and their speaker didn't show up, and I got to tell my story in person. And then this gal comes up and she said she recognized parts of my story, and she heard me on a Sober Speak podcast I did. And it was so cool. And I got to explore the United States, and I get to have God stories, and I can choose how I look at it. Now, my God is so big, I've had God change time zones for me. I was out in the west side of the United States, and I love back roads. And I don't know if it was in Idaho or Oregon or somewhere out there on back roads where I'd pass a person or a car every couple hours. And it was getting dark. And I said, God, I don't like being on this road. It's not lit up. And if something were to happen, like a deer run out or something, I could be stranded here. And this isn't what I really like. But I trust you, God. And I drive a little further, and guess what? There's a sign and it says you're entering the Pacific time zone. And I drive a few more miles and the sun's up where it would have been an hour earlier. And I get to the next town a couple hours away, just about dark. See, where God guides, God provides. I just get to choose how I look at stuff. Now, when I was a year sober, I had foot surgery and Lois died. I got my 1-year chip, and I got my 1-year chip. Wow. And then a guy got a 2-year chip right after me. And what he said is he thought his first year was the hardest, but his second was. And I remember standing there going, I don't want to go into 2. 1 was hard. I did a lot of work. I got through all my step in months. We did it like the big book, next at once, continue. We didn't wait till I felt like doing it. Once I had that 3rd step, when you do the 3rd step, which is reading that prayer, having some little inkling of trust in a higher power, it says next 4th step. And then it says 5th step. And it says if I don't do the 5th step, I probably won't stay sober. And when I did that 5th step and I had no knot in my gut and no more secrets, there was room for God to fill me with good stuff. And I work on 6 and 7 a lot. And so I thought, I don't want to go into 2. 1 was enough. And then God knew what I needed to hear, because the next guy said, it's only as hard as you let it be. That's been my experience. I told myself, don't be a salmon and swim upstream. Go with the flow. It's easier. But sometimes I do have to swim upstream for strength and courage. Sometimes life's hard. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. When Lois died, I was a year sober, and I went to the funeral with a lady named Sally that Lois sponsored for 14 years. And Sally was mad at God for taking Lois. I said, I can't be mad at God. God gave me Lois for a year, and I'm so grateful. I had her for 10.5 months. And if God said, Carol, I'm going to put this amazing woman in your life, but she's going to die in 10.5 months, I probably would have said, no, thank you. I don't want to suffer. That hurts to lose people. That abandonment stuff I had to deal with when I was new. But thankfully, God didn't tell me that, because what she taught me is still what I do. In addition to all those things I told you, she had me reading the big book. She had me write a gratitude list every day. I did it at night with my journal and my things I did to help my self-esteem list she gave me to do. And to call people in the program, 3 to 5 women every day. I was so busy. I didn't have time to think about drinking. Now, some of the prayers she gave me, was always pray about it for a few days. Nothing was usually immediate decision. Bless it or block it, God, let me know the truth. God, if it be your will, can I see this person or situation as you do? Work the steps through it, works in the steps through anything, solves it. And it's usually the secret, I'll tell you. I usually get hung up in step 6 and 7. My third step is I just say, okay, God, however today goes, it's your deal. My 6th and 7th step is, God, take all of me and give me back what you want me to have today. Because things aren't good or bad, right or wrong. They're just lessons and experiences to grow through to share with somebody else someday. That's it. It's that simple for me. Okay, God, how am I going to grow through this one? Show me you're there, God. Every year on my trip, something happens. Thanks, Charlotte. This time, you know what happened? I was at a campground in South Carolina. I got there on a Friday night. Saturday morning, I opened my back door, smelled gasoline. So this is not good. But guess what? I already had that experience in Albuquerque years ago. What happened is the fuel line from my gas tank to my generator was dripping gasoline. And how God had it work out is I didn't have to drive somewhere dangerous, because it would have been. I went to another RV spot. Somebody was sitting outside, told them what happened. He took me to another RV spot. The guy was sitting outside, said, I know a mobile RV guy. Gave me the guy's number. I called him. 90 minutes later, he showed up. I already had the extra parts, and it got fixed. Where God guides, God provides. I don't have to question it. God's the answer. What's the question? I heard somebody share that recently. In 2017, I was in Mississippi, and I was on a secondary north-south road an hour from the next town. And this voice kept saying, stop for gas. And I go, but I don't need gas. And I stopped. And you know what happened? When I went to go, the transmission had just quit with no warning. And I got towed in the wrong direction. I had to get towed twice. Where I finally got towed to, the mechanic says, it's going to take a week to get your transmission, but you can plug into my building and have electricity. And across the street was a pizza place, a beauty shop, and a grocery store. See, where God guides, God provides. When I was 4 years sober, I got colon rectal cancer. Had to have more surgery and more body parts taken out. Missing about 7 of them, I counted the other day. Had a 99-to-1 odds of a reversible colon surgery. The doctor gave me 99%, but God said, no, Carol, I think we'll give you the 1%. So I have a permanent ileostomy with a bag on the outside of my body. And I want to tell you, it's my footprint story, my personal footprint story. And I would tell you, it'd take an hour and a half or so to tell it to you, and it's still unfolding now, 30 years later. But if God says, Carol, I'll put you back the way you are, way you were, but you lose every lesson and experience, and so does everybody else because of it that has touched your life and you've touched theirs, I'd tell God no. See, I'm on borrowed time every day, I've learned. I wasn't even supposed to be around anymore, according to my doctor. God has a different plan. I don't know what it is. I suit up and I show up and I ask God, how do you want me to be of service today, God? What's my life going to be today, God? I don't know. I know right this minute I am in this meeting. The other day, I didn't know I was going to get a text from somebody I sponsor from Mexico that she was in Miami and take a train up and we were going to have lunch together. Right? Walked around the front of my car. Somebody had hit it, didn't leave a note. Don't know. I just get to suit up and show up and be of service to God today. And I get to match calamity and serenity when I stay where God wants me to. I'm so grateful, you know. I have a disease that is 1 in a million if you look it up on the internet. It's not alcoholism. My body grows tumors. I've got some in my brain. I've got more in my abdomen. I just had one cut out of my back. It happens. I could not go to a meeting, read a book, call you, and pray to not have it happen anymore. But I get to do that with Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a certain number of things. In Fort Worth, we used to call it the 5 Alive. have to do a minimum of 5 things every day to be sober. Pray, read the book, call you, whatever those 5 things. You're my mooring lines to keep me anchored into Alcoholics Anonymous. If I'm only doing 1, maybe none, and something happens, my parents die, I have to have another surgery, whatever it is, I'm going to be out there drifting, because alcohol's the subtle foe. Now there's a lady and she's walking down a path and she finds a snake and it's freezing and she picks it up and she puts it in her coat and it's warming up and it's wiggling around and it bites her. And she said, "Snake, why did you bite me? I saved your life. You were going to die. Why did you bite me?" I said, "You knew I was a snake when you picked me up." See, alcohol, I know what would happen. I don't want to pick it up because it's going to kill me. I watched a lot of people I love die from alcoholism. I don't want to be one of those. I stay close to you. I keep my roots deep in Alcoholics Anonymous. I am so grateful that I have a loving God that keeps showing me how big God is. I'm so grateful to have a way to live and a book of instructions called Alcoholics Anonymous. And that God knew how it's going to turn out when God created me, and God went ahead with it anyway. And that I get to change and grow because I'm never done. Top of page 100 is one of my favorite promises. The last 2 pages, Keys to the Kingdom, are too. It says this program allows for limitless expansion. I'm never going to outgrow it. Top of page 100, it says both me and the new man, and I like to think that's somebody maybe I haven't met yet, must walk day by day. Doesn't say year by year, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute sometimes, in the path of spiritual progress. Because if I persist, remarkable things will happen. Because when I look back, I'll find the things that came to me. When I put myself in God's hands, are far more wonderful than I could have imagined. So follow the dictates of a higher power, and I'll live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what my present circumstances. Sometimes I get the gift to see them as I'm walking through. Sometimes I have to look back, but I always see God's hand working. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I hope I shared something that helps you. Thank you so much for your love and support. And if I shared anything that helps you, thank our higher power.